Influencing popular culture, politics, and everything in between. The local station takes you ringside as we discuss the crazy world that is professional wrestling. This is Going Ringside with the local station.
Hello there, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Going Ringside. I'm your host, Scott Johnson, as we participate in episode 53 today. Today, I want to tackle all things Andre the Giant as we discuss the final days of Andre the Giant. We're going to get to that in a bit. After that, we're going to be joined by the Masked Hope, pretty much an internet host sensation across all platforms, really big on TikTok. And we're going to break down what we know so far about the WrestleMania 40 card. The Masked Hope will join us later on in the show. But before we move forward with Andre's story, as well as talking to the Masked Hope about WrestleMania 40, I want to talk a little about last week's episode and some of the headlines in the world of wrestling and fighting. First, last week's episode, if you want to go check it out right now, episode 52, talking about the loss of two great wrestlers. Virgil and Ole Anderson both passed away within days of one another. So our last episode, we sat down and we just talked about their life, their history in the wrestling world and their personal life, and we do everything Ole Anderson and Virgil in the last episode if you want to go check it out right now. In the fighting world in the last week, we've also got word that Mike Tyson and Jake Paul are going to have a boxing match this summer. We're monitoring that, may do a full episode on that a little later on in the show. That was big news that kind of came out, so we'll keep an eye on that and maybe have more on that down the road on the show. Today, we are going to talk about Andre the Giant, specifically the end of Andre the Giant's life, his final days. His real name is Andre Roussimoff. He was before Hulk Hogan took off with Hulkamania in 1983 through 85, Andre the Giant was the most well-known wrestler on the planet. He could not go in any country, on any continent, where he was not immediately recognizable. Everyone knew Andre. He lived a singularly unique life. And I say singularly unique. I don't think there's been anyone in history who has lived with what Andre did. There have been other people who have been giants. There have been other wrestlers who were giants, but no one had the just sheer fame that Andre Roussimoff did. He suffered from a disorder called acromegaly. A simplistic term is gigantism. We're going to talk to a medical doctor in a little while here on the show about how that impacted Andre's health, why he was able to drink so much, and how that contributed to his death. Another star who suffered from acromegaly was Paul White, the Big Show. But Paul White did something in his teenage years that Andre didn't do, nor did he have access to in his early life. Paul White had surgery on his pituitary gland, I think when he was a teenager, because with gigantism, it never really stops releasing growth hormone. We're going to talk to the doctor a little more about that later on in the show. The surgery stops it, so you stop growing. Andre never had that surgery. Perhaps if he had, Andre theoretically would have been alive for many more years, maybe theoretically still with us today. But Andre Roussimoff died at the age of 46. So I wanted to spend some time exploring Andre, who he was, particularly in these final years. And let's put up some images on the screen we have of Andre. And that's a good representative of what Andre was like in his latter years of WWF. He had put on a lot of weight. If you Google old images of Andre the Giant, keep this picture on the screen for a while. He wasn't that heavy, a lot thinner. He could do a standing drop kick. He was a very gifted athlete in the 1970s. And people often don't know that because this image here, and then let's put up the next one, definitely this image here, they remember well. That is Andre going into, I want to say, WrestleMania 4, at the end of he and Hogan's feud, where Andre was just an enormous man. Donald Trump said during his Hall of Fame speech that Andre the Giant was the biggest man he had ever seen because that WrestleMania was held at Trump Plaza. Andre the Giant was just a global phenomenon, but there he is much heavier than he was in his younger years. So if you're in my generation, grew up in the 80s, That's the Andre you remember. That's the Andre you knew. He was a lot thinner back in the day. We can come back on camera here, and we're going to talk a little more about his weight and how that played a role. But I've talked to a lot of stars about Andre here on the show on Going Ringside. You can go back and look at all these clips that you're going to see here in a moment. The full interviews are in some of the previous shows. But here are just some of the contemporaries of Andre the Giant talking about wrestling him throughout the years. From the Bushwhackers doing it in Australia in the 1970s through more latter years with Kevin Sullivan, Jim Duggan. Let's listen to some of Andre's contemporaries.
And Butch and me worked handicap matches around New Zealand with him. He was
with Andre?
7'4" and 350-pound man. He could drop kick.
He could drop. He was a 7'4" guy who could drop kick.
Drop kick, yeah, Andre.
What did it feel like when Andre drop kicked you?
Yeah, you certainly went down. And so he had 1 foot on my chest, 1 foot on Butch's chest. Everything was double. Handicap
so
matches.
Andre would sit on both of you?
Yeah, he'd sit on both of us. I've got photos on my phone of him with both of us in a body scissors. We're all sitting on our ass, and he's got his legs around the both of us.
Andre the Giant had both of you trapped between his legs.
Yeah, and body scissors. A lot of different things happened back then, and it was great too. When we come over here to North America, we came to a company called Grand Prix in Montreal, and Andre had come there about a year before us. Being a Frenchman, he came to a French part of Canada.
How did your national break come? When did you start going national?
Well, I got kind of recognition when I came to Florida, and then I was on the first wave of TBS that went nationwide.
Back in the early to mid 80s?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you were down here in Florida with Dusty and people like that?
Yeah, I wrestled Dusty quite a bit. I wrestled Blackjack. I wrestled the great Barry Windham, who's here today. And I wrestled Andre the Giant. So I had a very...
What was it like? You're not a big guy. You and Andre. What was that like?
It was great. I mean, I was 252 pounds at the time. I had been a power lifter and a bodybuilder, but he was a very nice guy to me, and it was amazing. People don't understand how big he is. I just saw something on YouTube where somewhere the WWE, I think they do it at WrestleMania, they bring this thing is put your hand next to Andre's.
Yeah.
Well, Brock Lesnar is a big guy.
Yeah.
And he put his hand next to Andre's. He looked like a child. That's how big the guy was.
And you started the colossal connection with Andre the Giant. What was that like?
Well, it was unbelievable. It was an honor also to be with the Giant.
Yeah.
It was great. I enjoyed very much. And I also miss him.
Yeah. And you were King Haku, which your shirt says right now.
Yeah.
How did it come about to crown you king of the WWF?
Well, it was the King of the Ring, and I took it away from Holly Race, one of the toughest guys of those days.
Yes, he was.
And, a great NWA champion, but they put us together at WWF then.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was Haku, and Haku's important. I'm going to talk about his importance in this story in a little bit. But Andre started, and I didn't even realize it was his soul. He started in 1964 as a teenager, so he wrestled for decades before a lot of what we just talked about, which is, his WWF run, which was toward the end of his career, toward the end of his life, and that's what we're going to unpack here. So Andre the Giant, while he was a global phenomenon, was a perfect addition to the WWF of the mid-1980s and Hulkamania. Pretty much your two biggest stars in WWF were Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. And I would argue that the first 3 years of Hulkamania were really building toward that Andre match. Starting with other stars to feud with, they got bigger with King Kong Bundy, and then eventually Hulkster took on the biggest of them all, Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3, when Andre at Piper's Pit turned on Hogan, ripped his cross off Hogan's neck, and put his finger in Hogan's face, and they started a feud that is legendary, maybe arguably still today, the greatest feud in the history of pro wrestling was Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant. In fact, last year, I would recommend looking it up. There is a song that was written out by a comedian in Canada, and it's literally called Hulk Hogan Slammed Andre the Giant. Anyone who grew up on 80s wrestling should watch that music video. It'll bring a tear to your eye. So Andre, by the time he's feuding with Hogan, is much larger than the guy who was seen in the 1970s and 60s. Put on a tremendous amount of weight. They say he was above 500 pounds. And they say he was 7'4". Before we move forward, I want to talk about the true height of Andre the Giant, because it's important. It's one of the things that I have followed the most over the years, is how tall was Andre really? It appears like the 7'4" number that's been put out, and a lot of wrestlers still protect, is exaggerated. It's not accurate. The reason why that's believed is, you can go Google it now, there's a famous image that circulates the internet of the movie Conan the Barbarian, where I think Andre had an uncredited role. 3 people are in that photo: Andre the Giant, Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Wilt Chamberlain. Wilt Chamberlain, one of the most famous basketball players ever, was in Arnold Schwarzenegger's Conan movie. So you see them standing together. You see Arnold way shorter than the two of them, and just Google, it's out there. Then you see Wilt and Andre roughly about the same size. So Wilt is a documented 7'1", very famously 7'1". Andre in the image looks a hair shorter. It's hard to say if Andre was not necessarily at his peak height at that time, maybe some back issues, or maybe he was slightly slouched. But based on looking at that, you can tell he was more likely in the 7 foot to 7'1" range. That doesn't mean he was not a giant man, but most people who have studied this think Andre was more in the 6'11" to 7'1" range. I would say more like 7'1", not 6'11", as some people think. But that's kind of what it looks like. But they say he was well over 500 pounds because he had gained so much weight, because he never stopped growing. He chose to never have surgery on his pituitary gland when he was older, and we're going to talk to the doctor about that. Because as a child, he just grew up poor in France. His family didn't have the money, or maybe the even understanding of what was going on with him. I think he was born a 13-pound baby, is one thing I read. They didn't have the knowledge or the financial resources or the medical availability to have his gigantism fixed. I don't even know if in the 40s they really understood how to fix something like that. Today they would. Paul White did that. Paul White saved his own life by making sure his pituitary stopped secreting so much growth hormone. Andrei Roussimoff did not have that benefit. So in the latter half of the 1980s, Andre the Giant, he peaks in his career. The most widely known match of all time, Hulk Hogan versus Andre, 1987, WrestleMania 3, Pontiac Silverdome. They have the big match. And then that sets up a year of feuding with Hulk Hogan. From WrestleMania 3 to WrestleMania 4, different things happened, but the subtext the entire year was Andre and Hogan still feuding. In fact, so WrestleMania 3 was in the spring of '87. By November '87, they had the first Survivor Series. They had Andre's team against Hogan's team, and Andre's team won. It was kind of like the revenge on Hulk Hogan. All the way through WrestleMania 4, that image you saw with Trump, where they're at the Trump Plaza, and Andre and Hogan are looked at as maybe the feud again, because Andre, through $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase, had taken the title from Hogan in this screw job, which we talked about on the last episode with Virgil, because $1 Million Man was involved. And those two, once again, for 2 WrestleManias in a row, with Donald Trump as the center, well before Donald Trump was in politics, talking about WrestleMania again with Andre and Hogan. That didn't really materialize into much, but that feud up until this moment lasted about a year. Let's come back on camera as we talk about the important part. The important part of this episode is what happened after WrestleMania 4. The WWF was starting to realize that Andre the Giant's health was not at one it once was. this is 1988. In 1978, Andre was in great shape. In 1988, he's slowing down. He would do his things on the ropes where he'd tie himself up on the ropes and let his opponents beat on him, or he'd do his spots, but he was not as mobile as he once was. He could only do so much in the ring. And he had some feuds following the Hogan situation. Big John Studd returned and others, but eventually the WWF brought in Haku, who you just heard from there about when he was on the Colossal Connection with Andre. And I want to point out all those clips were from the Going Ringside TikTok channel, where we put exclusive content here on the show and not on the show every single day. So give us a follow at the Going Ringside TikTok channel. But Andre was slowing down. So how do you still portray this larger-than-life attraction, Andre the Giant, when he can't physically do as much? You put him in a tag team. Haku was a gifted athlete. Haku could go in and do all the, athletic work inside the ring. Andre could stand on the ropes and come in and do a spot or two, and he didn't have to work as much because Andre was starting to slow down. He could still go. He never wanted to stop, but they put him in a tag team. And he had some different feuds along the way, a lot of tag team matches, a lot of battle royals, where he didn't have to singularly dominate a match for a long period of time, which was exhausting for a guy of his size. And so they put him with Haku, and then as the years go by, Andre's in-ring work starts to slow down. And eventually, I want to say in the late 80s, around the early 90s, Andre did have some surgery on his leg. And on camera, he had to come to the ring. It was either on crutches or with a cane because he couldn't walk too well. And one of the final things Andre ever did, which sadly never turned into a feud. As a kid, I would have loved this as a feud, was with Earthquake in the very early 90s. Earthquake had come in, and he was kind of the replacement for Andre almost, as far as a giant monster to feud with Hogan. Wasn't as big, but he was close. I mean, John Tenta, the Earthquake, was like 6'8" roughly, well over 400 pounds, a huge, huge man. And they did this thing when Andre came down to the ring. I think this was, if not his last appearance, close to it, where he comes down to try and stop a feud right when Earthquake's about to form a tag team with Tugboat, who eventually became Typhoon. They became the Natural Disasters. Earthquake takes Jimmy Hart's megaphone and takes Andre out at the knees and beats him up. And it was interesting to see because they were playing up on, Andre's real life recovery from a surgery. And that was really the last time we saw Andre in the WWF. And then Andre went on to do other things. And he could still perform as Andre the Giant, because Vince McMahon didn't own the copyright to Andre the Giant. Many times when wrestlers would leave the WWF, they'd have to change their name or gimmick because WWF bought and owned the rights to the character. That wasn't the case with Andre. It predated WWF. It was Andre. Who's going to tell Andre the Giant you can't go, be Andre the Giant? No one's going to tell him that. Andre could go do what he wanted. Something that was really interesting toward the end of his career was WCW. They used to have those Clash of the Champion, kind of almost pay-per-views, but they were free on regular television every few months. I loved them as a kid. And they had a Clash of the Champions, I think it was Clash of the Champions 20, and they brought back all the old legends. Gordon Soley was there. I want to say, a lot of those iconic wrestlers like Lou Thez from the 50s and 60s came back, and they had Andre there. This is when WCW was a distant second to WWF. You had Sting, Ric Flair, and others, and they had Andre the Giant. I think he still had a cane at the time. It was just intriguing to see Andre, this huge star, with the secondary WCW at the time. He was only there for one time. Also during this time, Andre did his acting. Andre did a lot of acting in the 70s and 80s with spots that weren't, credited. He was on, if you're young, you won't know this, but there was a show called $6 Million Man, The Fall Guy, Greatest American Hero. He was in the Conan the Destroyer film with Arnold Schwarzenegger. But the acting he's by far the most famous for is The Princess Bride. My wife, for instance, other people who don't know anything about wrestling I've talked to say they don't know anything about Andre the Giant, the wrestler, but they know him from The Princess Bride. He portrayed the giant character Fezzik, and that's something that Andre the Giant was really famous for. I would say that and Hulk Hogan and Rocky III are the two most famous wrestler turned to actor clip prior to, you know, Dwayne Johnson and John Cena doing it and Batista doing it today. So Andre is winding down his career and his health is starting to fail him. And frankly, it probably wasn't safe to put him in the ring, but he could travel and go where he wanted. He went to Japan, I think he went to Mexico, and he could really go on any continent and make money because people would pay to see Andre the Giant. If you go look at some of Andre's latter images, he would often be wearing a red singlet instead of the black that he wore in WWF. He just did not look good. He also wore a blue one. He just looked, his eyes were more puffy. He looked like he'd gained weight. There are a few matches that come to mind. One, I believe, was in Mexico against Rodney Anawae in a tag match, who would become Yokozuna a few years later. He was portrayed as the giant coquina or the great coquina, and he was a big guy himself. Eventually in WWF, he was like 600 pounds. At this point, he's probably like 450 or something. He's still getting bigger. And you see Yokozuna and Andre actually in a wrestling match together for a brief time. Andre did a lot in Japan in those last couple years. He would go and he would tag team with the giant Baba. Baba was an icon in Japan, one of the most well-known wrestlers of all time in Japan. He ran the territory. He was also a giant man of his own, like 6'9", 6'10". He had very skinny arms, but he was just a big, giant man in Japanese wrestling. And him and Baba would tag team a lot, and he'd do a lot of work in Japan. Andre could go where he wanted, when he wanted. But his health continued to become a problem. And in 1993, in January, Andre Roussimoff's father passed away. And Andre went back to be with his mom for his dad's funeral. And he was there and he decided to stay a little longer. And he passed away, I believe, in his hotel room at the relatively young age of 46. And Andre the Giant, it was a sad day in the wrestling world as the man who was as known as anyone in the industry passed away young. Not necessarily surprised because of his gigantism. The heart couldn't take it. There were some other things that I haven't really talked about, which is important with Andre, which we're going to talk to the doctor about, is Andre's drinking. Andre was legendary, still is to this day, for the volume of alcohol he could drink, possibly as a mechanism to, medicate the pain of living in the wrestling world. I mean, it was a hard life, something he enjoyed and was good at, obviously, but a hard life nonetheless. I mean, you're in there in a pre-scripted match, still getting punched and hit every day, and Andre's a tough, huge man, but still that's not easy. And Andre could drink huge volumes of alcohol. He went on David Letterman in 1984 and said he drank more than 150 beers. We're going to put that in the article that I'm going to write up here on news4jax.com, our website. Others talked about him just well over 100 beers in one sitting. Incredible volumes of alcohol Andre could drink. I just assumed, well, he's a giant, he can just absorb more. That was my general understanding of the volume of alcohol he could take. The doctor points out there's more of a reason to it than we realize, and it had to do with his gigantism, his acromegaly, and how it affects the liver. We're going to talk about that here in a moment. But it appears one way he was medicating things was with alcohol. There's a famous story. I think they had to put him under for surgery, and the anesthesiologist didn't know how much to give him because he was so enormous. And so I think they gauged it based on his typical amount of alcohol he could consume because it was so hard to knock him out. But I brought in Dr. Harold Lasky. Dr. Lasky is a longtime physician here in Jacksonville, Florida, where we're based out of at the Southside Medical Center. And I think he did actually many years ago some work with pro wrestlers. He's done some sports medicine over the years. So I wanted to sit down and talk with him about Andre's life and his gigantism and how it contributed to his health deteriorating and eventually took him of his life. Here's my interview with Dr. Harold Lasky of the Southside Medical Center based here in Jacksonville. Well, we are joined right now by Dr. Harold Lasky with the Southside Medical Center based in Jacksonville, Florida. Dr. Lasky, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I love talking wrestling.
Well, this issue of Andre the Giant is interesting. He had a disorder called acromegaly. Can you tell me a little about what that is?
Well, it's interesting. Before I get to the acromegaly, he had two actual medical problems, both related. The first one was gigantism, which is the same as acromegaly, but only when it is within the growth years. Once the bones stop growing, they can no longer become elongated. And so they start growing outwards. They get thicker, they get wider, and a whole myriad of other problems come with that acromegaly. You know, he really was an amazing wrestler. And I don't use that term lightly because he was in quite a bit of pain for most of his life once he was wrestling there.
Really? So I want to back up to what you just said. There is a difference between gigantism and the acromegaly. So it's technically two different things.
Well, it's technically yes, because it's the same pituitary gland which is affected. That's the master gland in your body. It controls something like 9 hormones and 5 other organs. And without it, there are major problems throughout the body. He happened to come from a poor farming family, and it was only until the age of 24 when they even diagnosed it. And so
I want to ask about that.
He opted not. So I'm sorry, yes?
Well, I was going to say, if he had learned about it younger, because you say it was a poor farming family in France, could this have been treated when he was younger?
Oh, absolutely. And they do it now. Most of the time when it is found out, there might still be some additional growth because that's what's going to clue you to that there's a problem in the first place. For example, Andre, 12 years old, 6 foot, 200 and something pounds. And nowadays we might look into that.
And the gigantism is not just height, because we think of someone really tall. Is it weight and features and everything else?
Well, the features don't come quite as early, and that's why so many of these people are found out later on in life, because they just think they're just getting taller. It's only when the bone growth stops, around 1920 or so, and then the bones can't grow any longer. The growth plates, which is how bones grow, disappears, and the bones cannot get longer. And especially and this is where most of these people with the acromegaly have the problems: feet and hands, the extremities. They can't get longer. So what does the bone do? It grows wider. It gets thicker. The jawbone gets larger. The forehead gets larger. The entire area over the eyes starts to jut out because the sinuses start to increase in size. And one of the major problems, apart from the heart problems, which is one of the things that caused him to pass away, a heart attack at an early age. The other thing was the tongue, which is one of the reasons why so many people thought that he had a lower intelligence, because he couldn't talk well. His tongue was quite a bit larger and made it difficult. Apart from the fact that with the mandible getting so large, the teeth started to separate, which also made talking difficult. We have to remember he could speak several languages and was quite adept at giving interviews. That's why so many people liked him. He was a wonderful person. He was not just a wrestler.
So it's interesting. So that would be the reason for his appearance, because of what it does to the bone structure in the face, that he had that large face look.
Right. And what happens is there's the pituitary gland. Again, that's the major gland. And the majority that have this have a benign, that means non-cancerous tumor of the pituitary. This causes an increase in the major hormone, growth hormone. And it's the growth hormone that in the younger years causes the bone to get longer. But if it continues producing more growth hormone, then the bones have nowhere to go, like I said, and they get just larger and larger, but in width and thickness.
So another wrestler, Paul White, the Big Show's been compared to Andre the Giant a lot over the years. He's another giant man, 7 feet tall. He, in his young adult life, had pituitary surgery to stop the growth. Is that often what younger people do with this disorder?
That absolutely. And if we remember Big John Studd, he also had acromegaly.
Interesting. I did not know that about Big John Studd.
Yeah.
So it is treatable.
It is absolutely treatable in the beginning, because once the bone is thick, you can't take out bone.
Okay.
So you have to prevent it.
I want to talk about Andre's latter life. So his latter year, because that's kind of the focus of this episode, is his final years. And he slowed down considerably in the ring. And eventually we saw him on crutches. Would he have been more vulnerable to walking issues as the years went by?
Oh, yes. One of the big problems, for example, is you will see a large number of acromegalic patients with diabetes. Remember, I said that it affects the pituitary gland. Well, it can affect many other things in the pituitary gland, some of the hormones. And what you get is the diabetes, you get heart failure, you get changes in fluids. And so they get fatigue, tired, aching, joint swelling. All of these from that one non-cancerous adenoma causing all this with that major gland in the body.
So you worked with, deep in your past, you were telling me you worked with pro wrestlers, and I'm sure at the end for Andre, the doctors with WWF or whoever dealt with the wrestlers would kind of been aware these things are starting to stack up for him.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there was one talk with him where he actually said that it's at some point, and I think it was around 24 or so, maybe in the 1980s. I don't remember exactly. That was his, I remember it because that was my years of watching wrestling. But he had admitted that at that point, he decided not to have the treatment done because it would have affected his, his business.
Because he was such a giant and that was such a selling point. Would he have stopped growing like immediately if he was in his 20s? Because he was probably 7 feet tall, but maybe not as, massive.
Right. I think he was 7'4", if I remember. And I think and he had other problems there that included, I think he was famous for, and he even talked about it on, I forgot what the name of the show, one of the Tonight shows, where he said that he at one point in one night drunk 102 beers.
Yeah, I want to ask about that. So that's the other thing about Andre the Giant, so famous, that he was able to drink so much alcohol. There have been stories about that for decades. Did he just physically able to absorb that much alcohol because of the weight, the size, or how does that work compared to a normal sized person?
It probably does have some degree of responsibility for this, but the growth hormone, again, not only affects growth, it affects the liver. And it's the liver where alcohol is detoxified in the body. So there might have been some reasons why he never felt the effects as much as other people would have, apart from that alcohol is stored in fat.
But so because the acromegaly affects the liver, you're saying, is that would have meant he didn't absorb alcohol the way you and I might?
It probably doesn't, and also how it affects him, because if it's not detoxified by the liver, which is our main poison control center in our bodies, I think the liver has something like 614 functions, of which detoxifying is one of them. And so if you can't detoxify, then the alcohol is not broken down, and therefore it doesn't give you that the problems that generally alcohol would if your liver is not doing its job.
Also want to get your opinion in Andre's younger years as a wrestler, I believe in the 1970s. he was fairly thin man for his size and could do things like a drop kick, was very athletic. Then in the 1980s, we saw him put on so much weight. Was that, and then he couldn't, do a lot of those athletic moves. Was that just the acromegaly, just adding weight as the years went by?
Yep, because when he has the gigantism, he may not even realize it because he's just growing. So the weight, I should say, the weight is compensated for by the increase in height. So he doesn't get the increase in girth. There's nowhere for it to go. So the fat and everything starts to accumulate. It just doesn't disappear with the amount of height.
Now, he passed away in his 40s. We've seen some old matches of him in the late 1990s when I don't think WWF would take him anymore because of health, and he would go, I want to say, to Mexico and some other international spots to wrestle, and he just didn't look good. I mean, you can go to YouTube and find some of those late matches. Would it have been very visible that he was just, not in good shape as the years went by?
Right, and I think from his interviews, he realized this, and he even said, I'm just going to run this through as much as I can. This is what I am.
If he had been in a different environment, gave up wrestling when he was younger and maybe under more medical care and a easier lifestyle, could he have lived longer, or does acromegaly really affect the heart if left untreated?
Well, if left untreated, you're right, but he probably would have not left it untreated had he just said, look, I'm going to pursue some other activity. The heck with my appearance. I'm going to get my health in better shape. He probably would have lived longer. Now that they can do surgery, that's not an easy surgery. You're going into literally an area in the brain that is so, how should I say it, protected. It's actually in an area called the Sia Turcica, which means a Turkish saddle. It looks like a Turkish saddle. It protects this one gland, the pituitary, because it's such a major active organ in the body. So it's a difficult surgery. And so he still would have had risks.
I also want to ask you about his lifestyle, because the lifestyle of the wrestler, particularly back then, was not easy. And he's a giant, 2 plane seats for everywhere he goes. He's traveling all over the world every night, taking a beating to his body, which is hard on a physically fit, smaller man. Could that have contributed to a lot of the problems at all? Or I'm sure it didn't help.
Oh, absolutely. That's why I always think of him. People look at him now, especially those who didn't know him when he was wrestling, his demeanor. He was just a nice guy. Most people said he was a wonderful person, which is one of the reasons why he was more famous than many of the others that had medical problems. And he just decided, like I said, to do this. If he had actually gotten this before, he probably would never have been as famous, of course. And he would have had to pursue some other activity because he just wouldn't have been the wrestler that he became. Again, you said that at some point he started wrestling on his fame rather than on his capabilities. I mean, I remember when he was drop kicking and all of that, but he gave it up. I don't think because he wanted to, and I don't think it was just because of the fame. I think it was the fame because he knew that if he continued, he would be still Andre. You were right. Also, 360 something days a year he was wrestling. That means he was in airplanes. He was in wherever going, and in pain. This is not a comfortable disease if you don't get it treated.
And I want to talk about end of life with him. I mean, we saw what we saw on television recorded in those final years, but end of life for someone, dealing with those things, I'm sure like an initial heart attack may take your life, but in those final months or days for him, any ideas what it would have been like for him?
He probably had quite a bit of discomfort, especially in his feet. I think that, as you said, that he had shown that with crutches and other things, that he was just not comfortable walking. The pads of the feet, the weight, the inability, the inflammation to do things, etc. These took a lot out of him. And I'm sure that his inability to wrestle anymore, because that was his life. he chose that. I don't know if you've ever heard his, or I should say, the interviews with his daughter. A lot of people don't know he was married, and he had a daughter who now follows and works his fame in many of these meetings and conventions. And she was talking about it too. I heard she said, he's my dad. I didn't talk much about wrestling with him. We went to wrestling when I was a kid. We did kid things while he was wrestling.
Now,
So
if he was in pain, if he had any pain, would it have been hard to medicate someone of that size? I'm sure aspirin's not going to have the same effect on him that it would on you or I.
It depends. They probably would have had to give him other medications that would have affected his ability to work. Yeah. And so I don't know if he was taking, if he was a man who was wrestling like the boxers do once a year, once every 4 months, he could do this and then not take the medicine during a match. But he's doing a match every day. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no time to take medicines often.
Could the alcohol have been a medication in some fashion?
Absolutely. How many people nowadays use that as a medication or just as an excuse for a medication?
Sure. Well, Dr. Harold Lasky with the Southside Medical Center in Jacksonville. Doctor, thanks for joining us today.
Anytime. Loved it. Thank you.
So I want to thank the doctor. Really interesting what he said about Andre's appearance was because when the bones stop growing, it spreads. It affected his brow, affected his jaw, affected his teeth, and affected his tongue, which is why Andre's speech was the way it was. It was just because how the acromegaly affects his tongue and his jaw. That's really interesting. And, of course, the drinking, because of the way the liver in someone with his condition deals with the alcohol, he doesn't get drunk necessarily as easy as someone else would, why he could consume so much incredible volume. But he passed away at the young age of 46. Andre could have theoretically still been with us if perhaps he had some surgical intervention when he was young, but that did not happen. He accepted that was his life, a life that was lived in pain, particularly there toward the end. But he kept pushing along, and he was a great, great attraction, maybe the greatest attraction ever in this form of entertainment that we call pro wrestling. On the wrestling thing, I do want to also talk a little about what we got going on soon. That would be WrestleMania 40. Some of the card has been set. I'm thinking it'd still be in flux. Roughly what we're looking at right now going into WrestleMania 40, Io Sky versus Bayley, Rhea Ripley, Becky Lynch. So the Roman, Cody, Drew, Rock thing, I don't want to say for sure what it'll be. Right now, it looks like it's going to be the tag match night one with Rock and Roman versus Cody and Drew. Maybe a Roman-Cody second night. I don't want to say for sure that's what's going to happen. Looks like I meant Seth, excuse me, Seth, not Drew. Drew will face Seth Rollins also in a separate match as well. Seth will be in those tag team matches with the Bloodline. Looks like we may have some stuff going on with Gunther. We're going to have to monitor, but who I wanted to bring in to break this down with us is the Masked Hope. If you follow wrestling online, you may know the Masked Hope. He's one of the biggest kind of internet hosts out there right now. Huge TikTok presence at the Masked Hope. Just search him on Google. We talk a little about that to break down what we know right now, and this will change every day, every week, about the WrestleMania card. Here's my interview with the Masked Hope. Well, I'm excited to be joined on the show now by a guy I've been trying to get for a while now. He is burning up the social media world in the wrestling universe and a lot of other places too. The Masked Hope. Masked Hope, should I call you Masked Hope? What do you prefer to go by here?
I prefer a Hope, let everybody know I'm the Hope for the wrestling community,
Well, Hope, talk to me a little about the show, where people can find you, where they can check out all your stuff.
Well, you can follow me on TikTok, Facebook, and YouTube, delivering daily wrestling news.
And they just search at the Masked Hope in general?
Yeah, just the Masked. I'm the Masked Hope everywhere.
Masked Hope everywhere.
Google the Masked Hope. You'll find me.
Not hard to find. Well, thanks for joining us today. Wanted to talk about Mania. There's a lot going on, as you know. As we tape this today, this is probably going to be released in a number of days. But as we sit here today, we kind of have the idea of the top 4 matches, it looks like. Let's talk about the one that is the talk of the world right now, and that is the big main event. Rock, Cody, Roman, Bloodline What are your thoughts on it?
Uh, the bloodline story, of course, every time it picks up, it's always incredible. So this whole thing is just going to be the best story of all of WrestleMania, pretty much. I'm just interested in what direction they go with it, because there's many rumors of who helps The Rock, who helps Cody, and what's going on with that. So I'll be interested to see what happens there.
So I've been wanting to get your thoughts on the whole Rock Cody drama before we got here. Do you think that was expected? Do you think WWE planned it in some fashion? What are your thoughts on that?
Not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. It was definitely, all right, get Cody out of here. It's The Rock's time to shine. It's gonna be rocking moment. Everybody's gonna love this. Everybody's gonna love this. And nope, we want Cody. The Cody crybabies. Cody crybabies start going wild. Bring Cody back into the fold. He has to be really appreciative of his fans, because they made a lot of noise and got them to change things.
So I've been sitting here wondering, with that happening, if this whole thing with Cody forced The Rock to turn heel. I don't know if we would have seen heel Rock if this hadn't happened. I mean, it looks like they made the deliberate calculation. We need to go old school heel here. That's where the heat is at.
Yeah, I don't think he would have been heel either. I would have never thought he would have been booed, because I was cheering when he came back. I was cheering when he pushed Cody Rhodes out of the way. I like Cody Rhodes, but to me, the bloodline storyline is bigger. So I was all for it, but everybody else had other opinions, I guess.
Well, it's hard. Like, the problem is anyone really going to boo The Rock? I mean, back when he was original heel, back when he started his career, like, he was a heel for about 6 months, and fans we really like this guy. And They already know the character. It's what they're calling for.
The heel work is immaculate. So how could you not like him? It's going to be heel for 2 seconds, and it's going to be like, yeah. Even he called them meth heads or whatever he said.
Yeah.
Oh, it's meth, and they still cheered. So what does he got to say to make them to boo him? I don't know.
Yeah. So the one thing I've wondered is, many times Rock has come back, and after Mania, we see him maybe once or twice, and then he goes back to his other career. Now that he's within WWE, do you think he'd stay back? He'd stay around a little longer now that he's on board of directors?
This is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking like he's going to be here for the long term now. This might be his post-movie career, because his last couple of movies weren't doing too good. So I could see him transitioning full-time into being a board of director executive and dealing with the XFL as well.
So there's a lot going on in the main event. You've got really 3 guys: Rock, Roman, Cody. Who do you think walks out champion? Do you think they want to continue Roman to try and eclipse Hulk Hogan's record, or do you think he's just, cut off in the end and he finally loses it here?
I still don't think it's time for Cody Rhodes to take the title.
Really?
I feel like we gotta keep running.
Time.
It's been, I know, it's been a really long time, but it's always so good. I feel like now that The Rock's involved this, like completely involved with this, you could ride this for another 6 months till SummerSlam, then he lose the title.
Yeah.
So I think Roman takes it again.
Well, what does Cody do then if he loses again? I mean, he can't finish his story. Like, the finish the story thing is so worn out at this point.
Oh yeah, it's been worn out. I was getting tired of it when he came back again and won the Royal Rumble. But you got Money in the Bank. He's collecting all these accolades. He won the Royal Rumble twice. Why not take a Money in the Bank and then challenge him again? 3rd time's the charm.
So a guy who has been overlooked. Well, now that you say that, Rock lost to Austin twice and then beat him on the third try. That's a valid point. The guy who seems to be lost in a lot of stuff, just like he's got the secondary title, is Seth. And now he's going to get Drew McIntyre. I mean, do you think Seth's getting a raw deal here? Or is it just being that The Rock's there and they got to do what they got to do?
No, 100% he's getting the raw deal. This tag team match that they're talking about now, I think he's taking the pin. Seth's taking the pin.
You do?
Yep. They're just devaluing the World Heavyweight Championship so much, and they're going to continue to do that, in my opinion.
So when Rock came back and fought Hogan, I want to say it was WrestleMania 18 or whatever, I want to say Jericho and Triple H were the main event. And they've been on record as saying no one really cared at that point. You can't follow that up. Do you think Seth and Drew McIntyre kind of are in that position right now?
Like,
yeah.
They have to start the show. I don't think if this tag match is happening, Seth, Drew start the show, and then you end the show with a tag match, because it wouldn't be anything bigger than that. You got all the stars in there.
So I have been saying on TikTok for a while, and most people think I'm crazy. I probably am. And this may be dated by the time we release this interview. I want to get your opinion. Any major celebrities? I mean, The Rock is obviously the celebrity of the show, but do you think any other celebrities? Around Super Bowl, was saying I could see Taylor Swift, Travis Kelce. I don't know if that'll ever happen. That was kind of me fanboying out, thinking it might happen. Do you think we'll get a big celebrity entrant in some fashion? Or do you think The Rock is enough?
I mean, it's WrestleMania. We could use like 2 or 3 celebrities. I saw a rumor Ronda Rousey would be present. I don't know if she'll be competing, but I saw a rumor she'll be present. We could always use a Bad Bunny. Don't forget, we still got Logan Paul as well.
Yeah, that's true. And Logan Paul looks like, who's he looking like he's going to fight right now? I don't think it's LA Knight. We were discussing this in my newsroom a little bit ago. I don't know that they, as I sit here today, that they've definitely set him on a match yet. And he was the talk of everything for the last 2 years. In my opinion, it kind of looks like he's taking a bit of a backseat with all the Rock stuff going on.
Yeah, he kind of is. Obviously, the Rock's the biggest star, but it's looking like Randy. I don't feel like
that's what we were saying. Randy, that's what I meant. Yeah, Randy is looking like, and I think that's a great feud for him going into Mania.
It'll be a really good match, and it'll put over Logan Paul well if he wins. But I feel like it should be an up and comer. Give me like Braun Breaker or someone like that.
Yeah.
Versus Logan Paul at WrestleMania. You put some eyes on the younger guys.
Do you think Drew is going to go over on Seth? Because hasn't Seth been dealing with some injuries? I could see him wanting to step away for a little bit.
I'm on the fence about it. I could see a scenario where, because Drew's contract is coming up, there's rumors constantly going back and forth whether he signed or not. So I could see them giving him the title just to get him to stay. And Seth's injured, so he could probably use some time off as well. So
on the women's end, we have let's start with Io Sky Bailey. Bailey is so incredibly over right now.
Oh yeah.
What do you think? This is a good match for her?
Oh, 100%. I feel like she's gonna get her WrestleMania moment too. I felt like the whole Damage Control, they've been taking a backseat to everybody else on the show, even though is it Io is the women's champion? Yeah. So I feel like they've been taking a backseat to everybody else on the show.
And so you have Becky Lynch going up against Mommy, and it looks like I think that's a good match. I think they built her up so much, and Becky coming in with her just what she's done. I think it's a good match.
There's your superstar match right there. That's going to be the 5-star classic right there.
So one thing that any other matches you would like to see? Anyone else that hasn't really been booked yet?
I would like to see LA Knight do something. What happened with him? He's super over, and they are not doing him right. Not at all.
Nope. So, one of the big things will be what happens on the Raw the next night, because they reshuffle everything. That's always the biggest Raw of the year. I do also want to get your opinion. Do you think there is any sort of tangential mention of a McMahon in any of this over the next month?
I can't see it. I can't see it. I feel like they want to move away from the McMahons as much as possible until get the situation sorted out with Vince.
I've been of the impression that the Rock Cody thing was a great distraction for WWE because they needed to get eyeballs off the Vince stuff.
Yeah, and that works like a charm.
Yeah.
I feel like that was their break glass in case of emergency moment right there. Like, Vince in trouble. Yeah. Bring the Rock out. Yeah, that pretty much saved the company.
Any thoughts on post WrestleMania where you see anything going, anything that you have in your crystal ball that you could see happening after Mania happens?
There's rumors. There's rumors Tama Tonga's coming to WWE.
Yeah. Yes. Is that Haku's boy?
Yeah.
Yeah. I had Haku on the show. I would have asked about it if I had known. Yeah. He is I think he is a great addition.
Oh yeah. Whether he was in the Bullet Club so he could side with Cody and whole bloodline thing, he could side with The Rock. So they're gonna make it interesting either way.
I wouldn't be surprised if they because many times they save something for the Raw the following night that they don't want to give away to have the build up. So that's a very good point. I would like to see him on. Well, Masked Hope, one more time before we go, give me one more time how people track you down.
I'm the Masked Hope. You can follow me on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram. Just look for the Masked Hope. You can find me everywhere.
Masked Hope, or Hope, as you said, I could call you. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much for joining us today.
All right, man. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate you.
So I want to thank the Masked Hope for coming on. May have him again on down the road to unpack what we got going on WrestleMania 40. Should be one of the biggest of all time, but I don't know if it'll be the biggest because it's hard to beat WrestleMania 3 with Andre the Giant, the guy we spent so much time talking about today. Just a very fascinating look at Andre and his latter years. Please give us a follow on TikTok or Instagram at Going Ringside. Once again, we're putting exclusive content out there every day. I want to thank you for watching this episode. We'll see you back here next time.
This has been Going Ringside with the local station, brought to you every Wednesday on your favorite podcast player, on New Sport Jacks Plus, as well as the New Sport Jacks YouTube channel.